You sit before me as if you have carried a long winter inside your chest. And as you breathe, the frost begins to melt along the edges of a truth you have avoided for many years. And perhaps this is why you are here, in this dimly lit room where the unconscious begins whispering again, where the soul dares to show you the image you once refused to see. A woman awakens the second she realizes she was never hard to love. And although these words may sound simple, they carry within them a tectonic shift in the psyche, a rupture in the old story that once imprisoned you for most of your life. You have not been fighting people, nor circumstances, nor even fate, but a distorted image of yourself reflected through the cracked mirrors of others' wounds. These mirrors told you a lie, and you believed it, not because you were naive, but because you were empathetic, receptive, deeply attuned to the emotional worlds of those around you. A woman like this often confuses her sensitivity for weakness, when in truth it is the antenna of the soul, the very instrument through which she receives the hidden language of life. You see, the moment you told yourself you were difficult to love, something ancient stirred beneath your awareness, an archetype shaped through childhood, through the mother's silence or the father's distance, through the small, subtle moments where you first learned that love must be earned, that affection is conditional, that attention has to be chased. These moments become the blueprint of the psyche. They are not loud events. They are whispers that settle into your unconscious, forming a pattern you do not notice until you find yourself living it again and again, as if under a spell. And yet, every spell can be broken the moment the one under it becomes conscious of it. Your awakening begins not with triumph, but with a quiet tremor in the soul, like the surface of a lake being touched by the first breath of dawn. You begin to sense something is off, not within you, but within the story you were handed. You start to realize that you have spent years trying to prove your worthiness to people who could not recognize it, not because it was invisible, but because they themselves were blind to their own worth. A woman who believes she is hard to love is not suffering from a defect of character. She is suffering from a misalignment between her inner reality and the distorted projections of those who have never met their own depths. In the symbolic language of dreams, the woman who feels unloved is often represented as wandering through an endless corridor, searching for a door that never appears. She knocks on walls, mistaken for doors. She mistakes shadows for companions. She mistakes silence for rejection. This corridor is not the world, but the narrow passageway of her own unconscious beliefs. When she awakens, the corridor expands, revealing itself as a space she had built for memory, not truth. And when she walks out of it, she realizes that the door was never outside, it was always within her, waiting to be opened from the inside. You may think this awakening comes suddenly, like lightning tearing open the night sky, but often it comes slowly. Like the gradual lifting of fog, you hear the faint echo of your own forgotten voice, a voice that has lived underneath layers of self-doubt, underneath the compromises you made to be loved, underneath the fear that if you expressed your full self, you would be abandoned. This inner voice does not speak loudly at first. It is like the child you once were, tapping on your consciousness with quiet insistence, asking, "Do you remember me? Do you remember who you were before you learned to shrink? Before you learned to carry the emotional burdens of others? Before you believed that love was something you had to deserve?" There is a moment, and perhaps you have already felt it, when something in your gaze changes. You begin seeing clearly. You begin distinguishing between your essence and your wounds. This is the moment when the psyche stops negotiating with illusions. You no longer chase love because you realize love is not something that responds to pursuit. Authentic love appears in the presence of authenticity. The more you contorted yourself, the further away it slipped. The more you softened your edges to avoid rejection, the more you disappeared from yourself. But the moment you draw those edges back, restore them gently, reclaim the contours of who you truly are, something miraculous happens. Life rearranges itself around your newfound clarity. There is an ancient symbolic pattern at work here. In mythology, the feminine awakens, not when she is chosen by another, but when she chooses herself, Psyche, in her journey to reunite with Eros. Does not win love through obedience or sacrifice, but through recognizing her own divine essence, her own inner authority. Only then does Eros return to her, not as a rescuer, but as an equal. This is the archetypal truth embedded within your awakening. You were never meant to be loved for your pleasing nature, but for your radiant nature. The part of you that cannot be dimmed or reshaped to satisfy the insecurity of others. Do you notice how your body reacts to this realization? There may be a soft trembling in your chest, a loosening of tension in your shoulders, a sensation as if some long-standing weight is being lifted. This is the somatic memory of the wound being touched, the energy of the unconscious rising to meet consciousness. Healing is not an abstract idea. It is the physical realignment of the psyche with truth. And truth, when it returns, does not arrive as an argument or a declaration, but as a deep knowing, a resonance, as if something inside you whispers, "Yes, yes, this is who I am beneath the years of misunderstanding." The woman who finally realizes she was never hard to love undergoes a reversal that is both internal and external. Inside her, the inner critic begins to dissolve, its voice losing the authority it once held. She stops blaming herself for the failures of others, stops interpreting abandonment as evidence of her inadequacy, stops mistaking emotional unavailability for a reflection of her value in the realm of the unconscious. These shifts appear symbolically as a locked room opening, a mirror clearing, a shadow stepping forward to be integrated rather than feared. Externally, her reality begins to rearrange. The people who once underestimated her no longer hold sway over her perception. The relationships she once clung to lose their gravitational pull. She begins to walk not toward validation, but toward authenticity. And people sense this change. They see in her eyes a fire that was always there but dimmed by doubt. The woman who awakens to her inherent lovability becomes magnetic not because she tries to be, but because she radiates the one thing the world cannot resist: alignment between the inner and outer self. There is a paradox here. When you believed you were difficult to love, you tolerated behaviors that wounded you. When you awaken to your true value, you no longer allow such wounds to repeat themselves. This shift is not an act of rebellion, but of remembrance, a remembrance of the sacred feminine within you. The archetype of the self that has waited patiently for you to come home to yourself. You may experience this as a dream in which you finally face a shadowy figure that chased you for years, only to realize that it was never your enemy, but the forgotten part of you that longed to be embraced. Integration ends the chase, and in this awakening, a new kind of woman is born, not hardened, not cynical, but sovereign. And as you sit with this newfound sovereignty rising within you, you may begin to sense that something subtle yet powerful is shifting beneath the surface of your awareness. It is as though the ground of your psyche, once unstable, once marked by the tremors of self-doubt and inherited wounds, is now beginning to settle. There is a stillness forming, a stillness that does not come from passivity, but from the profound recognition that you no longer need to chase what was never meant to run from you. This stillness is the beginning of inner authority. It is the moment in which your soul steps forward to reclaim its original seat in the center of your being, where it was meant to reside all along. As this awakening deepens, you start to understand why you tolerated what you did, why you dimmed yourself, why you tried so hard to earn affection that should have flowed naturally toward you. A woman who believes she is hard to love is often someone who learned to see herself through the fractured lens of someone else's limitations. She becomes the container for others' projections, absorbing their insecurities as her own, internalizing their wounds into her self-concept. And so she bends, she softens, she shapes herself according to the needs of others. But this is not love, it is survival. It is the psyche attempting to secure attachment by sacrificing authenticity. Yet the truth is that sacrifice always leaves a residue of emptiness behind, a small ache of resentment that grows over time. To awaken, then, is to recognize that this ache was not a flaw but a message. It was the unconscious trying to speak to you through feeling, through discomfort, through the subtle tension of living in a self that was too small for your true nature. The psyche rebels against falseness. It rejects what does not align with the soul. This rebellion may appear as exhaustion, as anxiety, as emotional withdrawal, or even as sudden clarity. But beneath it all lies the same impulse, the drive toward individuation, the innate pull toward wholeness. As you awaken, you begin to see that there were always two women within you: the woman who tried to be loved and the woman who has always been lovable. The first is shaped by survival, the second by truth. The first is created by the external world, the second arises from the inner world. The journey of healing is the journey of bringing these two women face to face, allowing them to recognize each other, to merge, to integrate. For too long, they have lived separately, one performing, one waiting, but integration dissolves the performance. You no longer need to be good enough, easy enough, quiet enough, or pleasing enough. You do not need to become smaller to fit into someone else's comfort. The woman who awakens understands that love is not earned through self-abandonment. It is revealed through self-return. In the symbolic language of the psyche, this moment is often represented as a woman standing before a mirror that suddenly becomes clear. For years she looked into this mirror and saw only distortion, a face shaped by other people's shadows, a reflection dimmed by her own fear of inadequacy. But now, as the old narratives fade, as the mist of false belief recedes, the mirror reveals her true form, and it is radiant, not because it conforms to any external ideal, but because it is honest. Authenticity is the ultimate light. You can imagine this awakening like the unfolding of a lotus, the petals gradually revealing the luminous center hidden beneath layers of mud and water. The lotus does not rush its blooming, it does not force its ascent. It rises naturally because that is its nature, and so it is with you. This awakening is not you becoming someone new. It is you remembering who you were before the world taught you to doubt your own worth. As this remembrance grows stronger, you begin to re-examine the relationships of your past with new eyes. You see now that those who could not love you were often struggling with their own inability to love themselves. They projected their inner fractures onto you because they could not bear to face them within. You became the screen upon which their unconscious played out its unresolved patterns. But that was never your burden to carry. You were never hard to love. They were simply unequipped to meet you with the presence, tenderness, or emotional maturity you deserved. What you interpreted as personal failure was often the echo of someone else's inner chaos. You may find yourself grieving at this stage, grieving the years lost, the self-abandoned, the love given to those who could not reciprocate. This grief is not a punishment. It is a cleansing. It washes away the residue of old illusions. It prepares the psyche for renewal. Grief is the guardian of transformation. Do not fear it. It is the proof that your soul is waking up. Gradually, you begin to feel the return of your inner fire, a warmth spreading from your chest, a quiet but steady confidence emerging from within. This fire is not the fire of anger or rebellion. It is the sacred fire of self-recognition. You begin to speak differently, to walk differently, to choose differently. Your boundaries become clearer because your value is no longer a question. You no longer interpret other people's inability to love you as evidence of your unworthiness. You understand now that people can only meet you at the depth at which they have met themselves, and those who cannot meet themselves cannot meet you. This realization liberates you not from love, but from the illusion that your worth depends on who stays or who goes. You become the one who chooses, not the one who waits to be chosen. This shift is like the rising of the moon over dark waters, illuminating everything you could not see before. You begin to recognize the emotional patterns you repeated, the cycles of attachment you entered, the unspoken agreements you accepted in exchange for feeling needed. These patterns do not disappear overnight, but awakening makes them visible. And visibility is the first step toward liberation. In dreams, this stage of awakening is often symbolized by a woman walking out of a forest. The forest represents the tangled layers of the unconscious, the fears, the memories, the archetypal shadows that shaped her early sense of self. To walk out of the forest is not to reject its lessons, but to integrate them. The woman who emerges is wiser, stronger, more grounded. She carries with her the knowledge she found in the darkness. She knows now that her sensitivity is not weakness, but intuition, not fragility, but clarity. And when she emerges, she begins to attract a different world, a woman who knows she is inherently lovable, radiates an energy that cannot be ignored. She no longer chases affection because she no longer believes she must. She becomes magnetic simply by being herself. Her presence becomes a sanctuary, not because she offers safety to others, but because she embodies safety within herself. People who once took her for granted cannot access her so easily anymore. The patterns that once ensnared her lose their hold. She sees through manipulation, through emotional inconsistency, through the subtle dynamics of relationships that depend on her self-doubt to survive. She no longer participates in those dynamics because she no longer identifies with the version of herself who needed them. This inner reorganization affects everything: the way you speak, the way you choose partners, the way you trust your intuition. You begin to recognize the voice of your deeper knowing, the quiet, steady whisper that was always there beneath the noise of fear and longing. This voice speaks from the center of your being. It speaks with clarity, not urgency. It speaks with love, not anxiety. And the more you listen, the more your life aligns with what was meant for you. In this awakened state, something else begins to happen, something unexpected, something profound. You start to feel compassion for the versions of yourself that once suffered. You do not reject her. You embrace her. You understand why she tried so hard, why she gave so much, why she stayed in places that diminished her. She was trying to survive with the emotional tools she had. She was protecting you the only way she knew how. And now, as you awaken, you do not punish her for her mistakes. You thank her for her courage. This act of self-compassion is one of the most powerful moments in the psyche's transformation. It is the moment where the inner split begins to dissolve, where the soul becomes whole again. You may even feel the presence of an inner guide emerging, an archetypal figure, perhaps a wise woman, a motherly presence, or a shadow self stepping into the light. This inner guide is not external, it is a projection of your own deep self. The part of you that has always known the truth but waited patiently for you to be ready to hear it. She tells you that you were never hard to love. She tells you that you were simply surrounded by people who did not know how to receive the kind of love you offered. She tells you that your awakening is not the end of your journey, but the beginning of loving yourself without condition, the beginning of choosing relationships that nourish your soul, the beginning of living from your truth rather than your fear. And this is where your transformation becomes irreversible. And as this irreversible shift settles into your being, something extraordinary begins to happen in the deeper layers of your psyche. The unconscious, which for so long held the fragments of your forgotten self, begins releasing them one by one, as though offering back to you the pieces of who you were before you learned to doubt your worth. This return is not always dramatic. Sometimes it comes as a soft recognition, the subtle easing in your chest, a realization that you no longer react to situations the way you once did. Other times, it arrives like a dream, vivid, symbolic, haunting, showing you images of the past, not to torment you, but to liberate you. Perhaps you have already noticed this shift in your dreams. Women who awaken from self-doubt often report recurring symbols: a locked box finally opening, a wild animal approaching them without fear, a dark ocean that suddenly becomes calm, a child who once hid in the shadows now stepping into the light. These are not random scenes. They are the language of the unconscious, expressing the psychological rebirth taking place within you. When the psyche heals, it does not speak in rational explanations, it speaks in symbols. And every symbol is a doorway back into your innate power. Imagine a dream in which you are walking through an ancient house, one filled with countless rooms, some dusty and forgotten, some still warm with the memories of who you used to be. In the past, you may have felt lost in such a dream, wandering through corridors, searching for answers. But now, something is different. You walk with a sense of direction. You begin opening doors you once avoided. In one room, you might find the young version of yourself, the girl who once believed she needed to earn love to deserve it. She may look at you with fear at first, unsure whether you have come to judge her, but as you step closer, she recognizes you. She sees in your eyes a truth she had forgotten. You kneel and you gather her into your arms, and in that moment, the psyche heals a wound that no external relationship ever could. This is the essence of awakening. It is not the world changing around you. It is you returning to yourself, piece by piece, memory by memory, truth by truth. And when this happens, the world must adjust to reflect the person you have become. As you move through your days with this new inner clarity, you begin to notice how differently you respond to the emotional currents around you. In the past, you may have absorbed others' moods as your own, mistaking emotional attunement for emotional responsibility. You believed that if someone grew distant, you must have done something wrong. If someone withheld affection, you must have failed somehow. But now, the fog lifts. You see that their emotions were never yours to carry. You begin discerning what belongs to you and what belongs to others. And this discernment is one of the greatest gifts of awakening, for it frees you from the burdens that were never meant to be placed upon your shoulders. You might feel this shift in very practical ways, where you once apologized for needing space. You now honor your boundaries without guilt. Where you once worried about offending others by expressing your truth, you now speak from the heart with quiet confidence. Where you once prioritized harmony over authenticity, you now choose alignment over approval. This subtle inner reorganization transforms the dynamics of every relationship in your life, not through force, but through presence. People sense when a woman has returned to the throne of her own being. They sense when she knows her worth, when she no longer negotiates with her own value, when she no longer fears abandonment because she has reclaimed herself. There is an archetypal quality to this transformation. In many myths, the feminine power lies dormant until she recognizes her own inherent value. Think of Inanna descending into the underworld, shedding layer after layer until she stands naked before her own shadow. Think of Psyche completing trials, not to earn love, but to awaken to her own divine nature. Think of Persephone rising from the darkness after realizing she is both maiden and queen. These stories are not about perfection, they are about integration. They remind us that a woman does not awaken by escaping her darkness, but by turning toward it and discovering that it holds the very key to her freedom. As you awaken to the truth that you were never hard to love, you may feel a wave of anger rising within you, anger at the years spent believing a lie, anger at those who reinforced it, anger at the emotional labor you carried in relationships where you were the only one giving. Do not suppress this anger. In Jungian psychology, anger is the heat that forges the boundaries of the self. It is the fire that burns away illusions. It is the signal that your soul is reclaiming territory that was once lost. But this anger will not consume you. It will clarify you. It will help you distinguish what is yours from what is not, what nourishes you from what diminishes you, what aligns with your essence from what drains your spirit. Slowly, you begin to experience a profound emotional recalibration. Where you once sought validation, you now seek resonance. Where you once feared rejection, you now trust redirection. Where you once tolerated inconsistency, you now recognize it as a symptom of someone who cannot meet you where you stand. And so you walk forward with quiet certainty, not needing to prove anything, not needing to chase anything. You become a woman who knows that true love is never obtained through the erosion of the self, but through the embodiment of it. At this stage of awakening, many women report feeling as though they have stepped out of a fog. The world looks sharper, their intuition feels louder, their emotions flow more cleanly. They begin sensing when something is off long before it becomes visible. This heightened awareness is not new. It was always part of you, but self-doubt once muted it. Now, with self-recognition returning, your intuition becomes your compass again. It begins guiding you toward relationships that honor your emotional depth, your sensitivity, your intelligence, your heart. You may also notice a change in the kinds of people who gravitate toward you. Some will be drawn to your newfound clarity, sensing in you a presence that feels grounding and alive. Others, those who once fed on your uncertainty, may retreat, unable to manipulate or diminish you anymore. Their withdrawal is not a loss, it is a purification. Your awakening naturally repels what is not aligned with your wholeness. This is the quiet beauty of individuation. As you become more yourself, everything that cannot meet your authenticity falls away. And in this falling away, a space opens, a vast, fertile space where new possibilities can germinate. You begin to imagine a different kind of life, one where love is mutual, where emotional safety is not a negotiation, where you are not afraid to take up space, where you are not asked to shrink in order to be held. This vision is not fantasy, it is the psyche offering you a glimpse of what becomes possible when you no longer operate from wounded beliefs. The moment you accept that you were never difficult to love, the universe responds by aligning circumstances that reflect your inner transformation. Something remarkable happens when a woman reaches this point. She begins to experience what Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reveal the alignment of her inner world with her outer reality. You may notice sudden clarity about decisions that once confused you. You may meet people who affirm your healing in unexpected ways. You may feel as though life is whispering to you, guiding you, responding to you. This is not magic, it is psychological congruence. When the inner world and outer world mirror each other, life feels harmonious, purposeful, alive. And yet, even at this stage, the psyche continues to test your integration. You may encounter situations that tempt you to return to old patterns. Someone who offers affection but is inconsistent. Someone who mirrors your old wounds. Someone who appeals to the part of you that once doubted your worth. This is not a setback. It is a final invitation to choose from your awakened self rather than your wounded self. Each time you choose differently, you reinforce the truth of who you have become. You may even find yourself revisiting memories that once hurt but now feel distant, softened, robbed of their power. This is a sign of healing. The past no longer controls your emotional state. It becomes a story you lived, not a truth you carry. You do not erase the past. You reinterpret it. You see now that every wound carried within it the seed of your awakening. Without those experiences, you would not have discovered your strength, your clarity, your resilience. Pain was not the enemy. It was the threshold. And now, as you sit in the soft quiet of this inner transformation, you begin to understand that your awakening does not make you harder, it makes you deeper. It does not make you distant, it makes you discerning. It does not make you unapproachable, it makes you aligned. This is the woman you were always meant to become. This is the woman who rises when she finally remembers she was never hard to love. And as this realization integrates into every layer of your being, it becomes impossible to return to the woman you once were. Something inside you has shifted so completely, so irrevocably, that even your silence feels different now. The silence that once held fear now holds power. The silence that once echoed with questions now vibrates with knowing. The silence that once accompanied loneliness is now the sanctuary where your soul rests, where you remember yourself effortlessly, where you no longer beg for clarity because you have become clarity. This is the moment in a woman's awakening when she no longer seeks love as a remedy for emptiness, but as a natural extension of fullness. She no longer hopes someone will choose her. She chooses herself. And in choosing herself, she becomes undeniable. There is an aura that forms around a woman who recognizes her inherent worth. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not meant to impress. It is simply the quiet radiance of someone who no longer abandons herself. In this stage, you begin to reinterpret love itself. You see that love was never meant to be a battlefield where you fight for attention or acceptance. Love was never meant to be a puzzle you solve by diminishing yourself. Love, in its truest essence, is the meeting of two whole beings, not perfect, but whole, each bringing their truths to the space between them. Anything that demands the sacrifice of your selfhood is not love. It is dependency. Anything that requires you to shrink your spirit is not love. It is fear disguised as affection. You may find that your heart feels both lighter and deeper at the same time. Lighter because you have released the burden of proving your worth to those incapable of receiving it. Deeper because you finally understand that your capacity to love has never been a flaw but a form of wisdom. A woman who loves deeply is not weak. She is expansive. Her heart is not fragile, it is vast. And those who once misunderstood your depth did so because they feared their own. You were never too much. They were simply not enough for themselves. The psyche at this stage often presents symbolic imagery of expansion, wide landscapes, open skies, calm oceans stretching infinitely. These images mirror the inner spaciousness you are cultivating. You may feel as if your chest has opened, as if there is more room to breathe, more room to live, more room to be. This openness is not vulnerability in the wounded sense. It is transparency in the awakened sense. It is the transparency of someone who no longer hides behind masks, who no longer performs, who no longer bends out of fear of abandonment. You become transparent not because you are exposed, but because you are secure within yourself. As this expansive inner space grows, you begin to sense the presence of a new archetype emerging within the awakened feminine, the sovereign woman, the inner queen. She is not a fantasy. She is the natural evolution of a psyche that has integrated its wounds and reclaimed its truth. This archetype has appeared throughout mythology in countless forms: the wise priestess, the warrior maiden, the goddess returning from the underworld, the queen rising to her throne. Each represents a woman who has moved through darkness and emerged not unscarred, but whole. This inner queen is the woman who trusts her intuition without second guessing. She does not fear losing people because she no longer fears losing herself. She does not chase, because she understands that what is meant for her will feel like resonance, not confusion, presence, not distance, nourishment, not depletion. She knows that love aligned with truth never asks her to fracture her spirit, and so she waits, not passively, but consciously holding the frequency of her worth, allowing life to meet her at the level of her awakening. When you reach this point, the past begins to lose its grip on your emotions. The memories that once pierced you now feel like distant echoes. You do not erase them, you transform them. They become chapters in your story rather than anchors that weigh you down. You carry them with gentleness, knowing they shaped your journey but no longer define your identity. You begin to feel gratitude not for the pain itself, but for the strength it forged within you, the clarity it granted you, the awakening it initiated. In the outer world, this inner shift begins to manifest in subtle but unmistakable ways. You find yourself drawn to different people, different conversations, different environments. You feel less tolerance for chaos, for inconsistency, for relationships that feed on your uncertainty. You create distance from anything that disrupts your inner peace. This distancing is not coldness, it is discernment. It is the wisdom of someone who finally honors her emotional energy as sacred. Your language changes, your posture changes, the way you inhabit your body changes. You take up space not because you are trying to assert yourself, but because you no longer compress yourself. You speak with a steady calm that comes from knowing you have nothing to prove. You move with a softness that comes from being deeply rooted. You radiate with a subtle power that others can feel even before you say a word. It is the quiet power of a woman who has come home to herself. And then something else begins to unfold, something delicate, something profound. You begin to feel readiness, not readiness to attach, but readiness to receive. The heart that was once tangled in fear becomes open in trust. The heart that once clung out of insecurity now rests in patience. You begin to understand that love, when it arrives in its true form, does not disrupt your inner world, it harmonizes with it. It flows to you effortlessly because it matches the frequency of your awakened state. At this level of consciousness, you no longer attract partners who resonate with your wounds. Instead, you attract partners who resonate with your wholeness. These are individuals who are not intimidated by your depths, who do not shrink in the presence of your clarity, who do not project their unresolved shadows onto you. They meet you with openness. They meet you with steadiness. They meet you not because they need you, but because they see you, the real you, the unshrinking, unbroken, unmasked woman who stands before them without apology. But even before love arrives from the outside, something even more extraordinary happens inside. You begin to feel joy again, not the fleeting joy of validation, but the deep joy of existence, the joy of waking up in a life where you are no longer at war with yourself, the joy of becoming the woman you once feared you could never be, the joy of discovering that your softness is strength, your sensitivity is wisdom, your intuition is truth. You begin to live in a rhythm that feels aligned with your soul. You make decisions not from fear, but from clarity. You move not from desperation, but from calm intention. You listen to your inner guidance with trust rather than doubt. You honor your emotions without drowning in them. You hold compassion without sacrificing boundaries. You love without abandoning yourself. This is the woman who awakens when she finally understands that she was never hard to love. And now, as you breathe into this transformation, you may sense that there is one final realization emerging, a realization both simple and life-changing. You were not awakening to become lovable, you were awakening to remember that you already were, all along, beneath the layers of doubt, beneath the echoes of childhood wounds, beneath the projections of others' limitations. There was a woman who was always worthy of love, always deserving of tenderness, always enough exactly as she was. The journey was never about becoming someone new. It was about removing everything that made you forget who you have always been. And now you remember, you sit in the quiet glow of your own wholeness. You feel the soft certainty of your own value. You rise not as a woman seeking love, but as a woman who embodies it. This is your awakening. This is your return. This is your truth. You were never hard to love. You were simply waiting to realize it.